Hello and welcome to Cricket 8 Podcast. I'm Megha and joining me here is Jared Kimber. Two important topics to address today, starting with the Women's Premier League, concluding with the Saudi League. But first up, the Women's Premier League. The third edition has successfully concluded. Yet again, DC finishing as the second best, despite finishing at the top at the end of the league stage. That has happened in the past two editions as well, but falling short to Mumbai Indians by 8 runs. Now, in the previous two editions, they lost by a decent margin. They lost by 7 and 8 wickets, but this would hurt more because this happened thrice in a row, and also the margin wasn't huge.
So here's my question for you, because I didn't watch really any of this tournament. Certainly not very much. I've been putting my studio together. I haven't even had Wi-Fi out here. So last week I've kind of been on my own. But are they a good team who just hasn't had luck in the final? Or are they a flawed team who's been lucky to get the final? That's my question to you.
So, in the first two editions, they were absolutely dominant in the league stages, finished at the top. This time around, equal on footing with Mumbai Indians, 10 points each. They did stutter a bit in between during the league stage as well. So, they've been a good team. In fact, this time around, they further boosted their batting lineup. So, they've been a good team, but somehow in the finals, they've lost from uh, some strong positions. For example, they decided to chase simply because of the fact in the previous two editions they lost by massive margins, so they wanted to do something different, and this time around they thought that that different could be actually chasing, and they had Mumbai Indians at 14 for 2 at the start, and then this partnership between Harmanpreet and Knight Brand that had to happen because both of them were in decent run of form. They managed to then get those 2 wickets, and then even at the death they were taken for plenty. So they are a good team, but they've not pounced on those key moments, despite creating those key moments in the finale.
Is Mumbai that much better than everyone else? Oh, DC is the South Africa of Indian cricket. There's a lot going on in that sense. Is Mumbai that much better than everyone else, or because it's a weird one, because it's sometimes you see these things where teams will early on win a lot of championships because they get things right, and sometimes you'll see it because they're in a small league and there aren't that many teams, and things go right. So are Mumbai the real deal for you?
They are pretty strong because one was wondering with Pooja Vastrakar not there and how good she had been for them up front in the power play overs. They might struggle in the bowling department, but their all rounders stepped up big time. Uh, whether that was Natsiva Brunt or Haley Matthews, Emilia Kerr, and then also Shabnam Ismail. So they were all in a great run of form, and it all came together for them. So we've seen that with the men's team as well, that pedigree that they carry, and now with the women's team as well. When they get to the finals, they come back with the trophy. Last time around as well, it was in the eliminators that they lost, not a huge margin. Harmanpreet was blamed because, and that's another conversation, but I'd like to address it. Harmanpreet, the time that she takes to get her eye in, even in this edition, that was a concern, although there has been
And
some
the other,
improvement on that front. Yes, Jared.
yeah. So no, I was going to ask about Harmanpreet. So I find her really interesting. She's obviously been important, but it's not as if she's been the most important player in this league so far, although she is probably the person who's made this league exist by her innings in Derby a few
Yeah.
years ago. Where does she sort of stand in WPL early folklore?
Hmm. Just by the virtue of the fact that she is a captain, a marquee player, there's a lot of interest around her. And like you mentioned, if not for her, the league wouldn't probably have come into existence because we go far back to 2017 when that knock in the semis actually got Indians interested in women's cricket in the way that we see it now. So that, and also the fact that it does take her time to get her eye in, but there's some stellar knocks that she's played over the years, including the knock against Gujarat Giants last time around. There were some drop chances this time around as well in the finals. That was a game changer, got her the player of the match award. And that 66 that she scored was eventually the difference between the two sides. Natsiva Brunt, her knock notwithstanding. So she has been an important figure, if not the focal figure. Uh, if we talk about the core nuclear figures, it has also been about a lot of these foreign players. And that's the question, right? How many youngsters, there are a lot of players who are discards who made their comeback courtesy WPL, but when it comes to the youngsters, are they actually making the most out of this opportunity? Jared, I'm sorry, I think I couldn't hear you last, what you uttered at the end. Is it just me? Should I do something about my earphones? I think people in the comment section would have to let us know if they can hear Jared, or is it just me? Uh, all right. So we'd have Jared back very shortly, I mean, very soon. But yeah, we were talking about the focal figures. Now, for any league to be successful, you also need new names to spring up and use that platform. Yes, Jared, you're back. And visually as well, it's looking very good.
I'm back in every way. Yeah, no, I just wanted to talk about Meg Lanning. So,
Yeah.
obviously, we know that she's moved on from other formats, international cricket, and she's had her own issue. I just wondered where, where you saw her at the moment based on this tournament.
So, Shakespearean tragic figure, uh, because that despondent look on her face at the end of each of these finals. She's a serial winner. She's won so much for Australia, otherwise as well. But just because of the fact that she doesn't play cricket round the year, now that is going to take a toll on her performances at some stage or the other. We've seen that with everybody across leagues. With Meg as well, she was scratchy initially. There were some innings where she then obviously stepped on the gas pedal at the right time. But considering how good she was as a batter as well in the first two editions, compared to that, this time around, not at the same level. For example, Elise Perry, there were concerns because she was coming in with the sort of hip injury that she suffered in the test match in the Ashes test. But she hit the ground running and was a consistent contributor for the RCB. And Jared, remember the conversation that we had ahead of the WPL with RCB missing the key figures, the two Sophies, Shanka Patil. Eventually, that did come back to haunt them.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I'm just going through Meg's record. So she's
Mm.
basically she played a lot of cricket last year. So in 2024, she plays over 30 games, right? So it's not that she's not playing any games. That's a
Well,
good amount
mm,
of games. But in the past, she would have also been playing one day games and red day games and club
yeah.
games and, kind of everything else, right? Like she would have been involved in absolutely everything, right? Whereas now, it's a little bit different. But also, a really weird thing, I hadn't really factored this in. This is where you need a hyper course around. But the women's big bash is on really early. It's basically
Yeah.
played at the start of November to the middle of November, or
Mm,
I think the
mm.
22nd, 25th, somewhere around there. And so then there's then nothing for her to do until February as far as top level cricket is being played if she's not playing all that much outside of that, right? So
Yeah.
if that's the men's Big Bash and the men's IPL probably run in a little bit closer to each other because the men's Big Bash goes into January. And this was I
Yeah.
remember AB de Villiers, and you brought it up before, that, sort of talking about how these things go. These players, Meg Lanning and AB de Villiers, could play forever, right? Because they're
Yeah.
so much, they pick the ball up so much quicker than everyone else. They're so skillful. But when it comes to keeping yourself match fit and feeling ready. And you only need to be back. You only need to struggle a couple of times, right? And then afterwards, you have the exact same problem. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, you, you, you feel like you can't continue it, and that it doesn't keep happening, and everything else. But it's really, really interesting. Sag's just put in a question here: how do players deal with eating disorders and issues as such? It's not something that has been as big a problem in men's cricket so far. I think Freddie Flintoff has talked about it, so it does play a part. But the problem with diet, and this is why being a professional is so much more important than being an amateur, right? Like, the decisions that you make is any way that you are cheating your body and you are not looking after yourself in the way that you should is going to affect you on the field one way or another, right? Like if you're not doing the cardio work and you're out there in the beginnings, you're going to have trouble. Like, if you're not stretching correctly, you're more likely. So I think from that point of view, from Meg Lanning, it might have played an issue. I don't think it's probably, well, I could be wrong, but I don't think it's playing an issue now. But there might have been times in her career where that has been the case before.
Hmm. Interesting. There's another comment on Meg, and that's coming from Umang, who says that's how life works. Meg Lanning won everything there is to win, but can't win WPL, whereas Harmanpreet Kaur couldn't win anything in international cricket, but is winning the WPL and even contributing in the final. So two titles for her now, and Meg obviously is yet to win a WPL title. But overall, just looking at the tournament holistically, clashed with the Champions Trophy. There was a lot of buzz around the Champions Trophy as it reached its business end. Very difficult for a tournament like WPL to feed off Champions Trophy because it's about nationalities, and we discussed about it in detail in the last podcast. This time around, of course, like last time as well, there was important England series happening. Before that, there was Australia series happening, test matches. So it isn't necessarily feeding of those tournaments. The window would be allotted to WPL in the seasons ahead, and that would be a fixed window broadly around which WPL would function. But overall, still, it managed to capture new audiences, and I say so because it has now traveled to two new cities, and that's Vadodara and Lucknow, and that's going to be very important. The cities that the tournament travels to.
Yeah,
Jarrod also
also, I
won.
think,
Hmm.
yeah, no, I think also it's always going to clash with something,
Yeah,
right? Like, this, we'll get onto the Saudi league after the break, but the truth is that if you devise a cricket tournament right now, it's going to clash with something because we have cricket tournaments 377 days of the year, right? Like there's always cricket being played somewhere. There's always something going on. There aren't really any dead spots. So
yeah,
the Women's Premier League kind of has to deal with the fact that is the case. I think the numbers are fine for a women's
yeah,
sporting event. Like I think it's good. I think it struggles with coverage in the same way that I think the IPL, weirdly enough, struggles with coverage in that it's not being covered correctly. I saw Best
yeah,
of Cricket. I don't know if you followed Best of Cricket during this tournament, but they were doing more interesting stuff on the WPL than anyone else ever has before. So I think there is an element there of those things playing a part. But yes, in general, I think if you really it doesn't, it's not like it needs to feed off the Champions Trophy
yeah.
or an India men's
But say in
series
terms of
or
sponsors'
anything else.
attention, do you think it gets tricky then? Because if there's a major tournament, not the Test series, but say Champions Trophy or a T20 World Cup and stuff like that.
I think sponsorship can be more interesting because what happens with sponsorship is, and I run a cricket network, right?
Yeah,
There's only so much sponsorship money to go around in cricket at any one time. And so
yeah,
that can be tricky. But having said that, if you know when that tournament, Champions Trophy is not going to be at that time every year. India are not going to
yeah,
play Australia in a test series at every time that year. So
mm,
over a period of, this is why league sport makes more money than international cricket. It's not that international cricket isn't bigger
pattern.
because it still is way bigger.
Mm,
It's that you know when it's going to be and you know there's going to be
yeah,
a game in prime time every night, right? And so I think over a period of time that won't matter. It could cause an issue. The other thing I would say though is when it comes to sponsorship, women's sport actually does really well with sponsorship. And one of the reasons it does really well with sponsorship is it plays to a slightly different market. So it's not tapped out.
yeah,
Men's sport is so tapped out with sponsorship, right? Like it's
saturated. Yeah,
ridiculous. The same I don't know what you get in the India, but UK is hilarious. It's literally boner pills, hair loss stuff, and insurance because you're about to die. Right, it's the same three ads over and over again, and then occasionally, if it's like an Asian tour or the IPL or something, you then get the companies to send money back home to your loved ones.
wow,
Remitly and all those sorts of companies, right? It's the same thing on repeat over and over and over again. And you're like, it's so tapped out. And I remember talking to people within cricket when women's sport was coming through and sort of saying, how do you find money? And they said, we can find money in sponsorships in things that would never sponsor men's cricket. And also, more importantly, it allows them to it's much cheaper and much easier to sponsor women's sport than it is men's sport. And so I remember, do you remember a company called Investec that used to sponsor cricket quite a bit, sponsored the England team and a lot of test matches around the
Okay.
world? They're a South
Yeah.
African
What?
country. I think they might have done South African cricket as well. But they certainly did English cricket. I remember talking to them about it, and they were like, one of the best sponsorship partnerships they had was the England women's hockey team. And I was like, what? Like, and they were saying it didn't cost us a lot. Women's hockey actually went out of their way to satisfy us, whereas with cricket, men's cricket, it was really hard because the male cricketers didn't want to deal with another sponsor and everything else. They would turn up to events. They were used to. They were quite happily would do stuff that the men's cricketers would see as beneath them and everything else, and it allowed them to be professional. So, and I remember, Fair Break. Do you remember the Fair Break tournament?
Yeah. The
They
tournament.
were telling me that one of their big things was that women's athletes are really good at social engagement online. So if you had a sponsor, let's say the WPL is, I don't know, let's say it's 1/50th the size of the IPL. I have no idea what the overall, but let's say it was that big. The cut through on social media is much closer, right? And the reason is because
Need
women
audience.
use social media a lot better than male athletes. Male athletes quite often leave it to their agents, whereas women don't have agents and social media teams. So it's a much more natural, it's much more organic. You
Personality.
learn about their lives, right? So there is a natural cut through. Probably a lot of pervs. Let's be honest, Mega. There's always pervs, right? But there's a lot more
Yeah.
natural cut through when it comes to that. So that's where the WPL is going to live. It's going to live through social media. It's going to live through sponsorships. And then if it gets into viewership habits, because that's the other thing. I don't know how you feel about this, but I kind of feel that for me, at a certain time, like I watched the SA20 this year. It's the first time I've really watched. I've watched a bit of Super Smash in the old days. Was it Super Smash or whatever it was called in the old days? Um, I watched the old tournament, but it never got into my time zone, right? In the way I was living and working at that time. Once something does, that's kind of it. I'm probably going to watch it quite consistently going ahead, right? In the same way that at the end of every English summer, the blast is on. That's all. That's
Yeah.
the sort of thing that that's the sort of thing that the WPL will get. It will be the thing that is at that time
Have
in the
it.
year, right? And also the other thing is it doesn't actually need to cannibalize men's cricket, because if you go back through the history of women's cricket, the audiences have always been quite separate, right? The difference before was that the women's audience could never get to any big amount because it just wasn't marketed correctly, it wasn't run correctly, it was basically amateur while the men's was becoming professional. Whereas now you have that ability and that you can build that up, and so it will appeal to people who just like it, right? And the women's big bash is a perfect example of this. Of I know lots of people who don't follow the men's big bash, but they do follow the women's big bash, partly because they think it's a stronger league than the men's league, and partly because it's at the right time of the year where there isn't any other cricket on, right? Like it is in that November window where maybe the men's team is about to play some test matches, right? But
Yeah. About to.
early November, there's not a lot going on. So you certainly have that. So I think I'm really interested in where the WPL goes from here. We've got three strong leagues at the moment that are all played quite a bit. So I'm interested in all three of them and how they go. I think when I started 17 years ago, but even if you go back to 10 years ago, women's cricket kind of didn't exist. To get where we are now, to have a conversation like this of like, oh no, maybe it only got the highest viewership of any women's cricket ever, or whatever. It just tells you how far we're coming, and that's why I think I had this argument with a sports lawyer recently, where he was saying I don't get it. Women's sports never going to go anywhere. Women's cricket it's not going to go anywhere. And I said, what sports do you watch? And he's like, oh, I watch football, cricket, and I watch college American football.
Okay.
And I said, why do you watch college American football, but not the NFL? And he was like trying to fumble for his words. And I said, so you don't think there'll be people who watch women's sport over other things of sport? And I think we in our minds imagine that people automatically gravitate to the top leagues. That is not why people watch sport. People watch sport for very
Yeah.
varied reasons. When I grew up, I
Associations.
watched,
Yeah.
yeah, when I grew up, I watched lots of, I watched the level below the top level Australian rules football a lot because I really liked it. And
Yeah.
I couldn't even tell you, Mega, intellectually why I liked it, but I did. And I watched quite a lot of it. And, in America in the next month, there's going to be two lots of basketball that you can watch in men's sport. There's going to be the NBA and there's going to be the March Madness in college. And I can tell you which one Americans are going to be more excited to watch. They're going to be more excited to watch a guy who in 2 years' time is going to be playing in Slovenia, right, than they're going to be watching LeBron James. And it happens every
And
single
at
year.
mass level.
So you have to set these things up for people
Hmm.
to be able to watch them and follow them.
And interestingly, I think sponsorship scene in India, that basket is fairly heterogeneous, simply because of the fact the numbers involved. Every people from every walk of life would get associated now with different ways of viewing. For example, you view it on TV, you view it on your phones, iPads, you view it personally. That probably changes the dynamics by a bit because you can specifically cater to what that particular audience likes. So it has involved a very large heterogeneous group. So, like you mentioned, in the UK, probably it's restricted to some brands and some products. But in
Yeah.
India, even with regards to title sponsor, we've seen a gamut of those.
I think if you go back, you still have India was always in and most of the subcontinent was in an advantageous position, right? As
Mm.
in they were being set up. They were cricket was always watched by more than just older men, right?
Yeah.
That's not the same case everywhere else. Women's cricket can bring an even younger audience in and a more dynamic audience in, which if you're working with an advertising company or in advertising or PR is really exciting, right? And that's the advantage of women's sport, I think, going into the future. And I remember there's a sports writer in America who I followed a lot, and he would go on and on about how every Nike ad now had a black woman in it or a non-white woman, and it was just like it's ridiculous
Mm.
because men buy Nike
The
and
stereotyping. Yeah.
and I was like, no, you're all misunderstanding. What is Nike? Haven't suddenly grown a conscious. They're not woke, right? They had sweatshops 5 minutes ago, right? They're not woke.
Mm.
What Nike is doing in the future is going, we have sold everything that we can to the men. The men are in. The men have got sneaker
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah.
They're wearing sneakers to weddings now. We're done. We're tapped out. What's the next market that we need to get involved? And that is women.
Mm.
And I remember, I've forgotten his name. You may remember him, but there were two people that kind of formed the IPL originally. So obviously, Lalit
Mm.
Modi was the architect or
Yeah.
whatever he called himself.
Mm.
And then there was a white, middle aged English guy who worked for IMG, Andrew, someone, and someone in the comments might remember
Uh,
his name. Um, and I remember interviewing him. And we were talking about sport because we were sports writers. So we were like,
mm.
let's talk about the IPL, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, no, you guys are wrong. Forget sport. I'm not interested in sport. I
Mm.
have an entertainment product and I want 65-year-old women to be following my entertainment product. He said,
Mm.
because then I can get fridge companies to advertise. And he was going through the list of how he wanted to do it. He goes, my stuff is not competing with India versus Pakistan in a test match or,
Yeah.
when those still existed. My product is going up against Bollywood movies or whatever movies are on TV that night.
Yeah.
And that is where cricket is getting to. And the WPL is another very, very good part of that sort of thing. There was already a market there, and obviously, there was a loose structure on top of it. But you can really monetize things quite well. And that's what women's cricket has always needed. Women invented cricket, right? The
Yeah.
milkmaids of Sussex and Kent invented cricket, right? The whole sport looks the way it does because women played it, right? And then they were pushed out of the game by men,
Mm.
especially when the money came, right? And then they were banned from playing because of Victorian ideals. And then later on, gender roles in different countries around the world and everything else. Women have always enjoyed cricket. It's just that they were ostracized from it. And now you're in a situation where that's what the sport needs going into the future, right? It needs multiple streams. And also, I think we're not that far away, and it's harder to happen now that we have the WPL. But I don't think we're that far away from women just taking over women's cricket and running it on their own. They don't actually need men anymore.
That was the factory setting. But yeah, just to elaborate on your point, probably that's why Lalit Modi went up to the Bollywood stars, went up to the prominent
Yeah.
corporate names for them to get involved, because through the Bollywood stars, there was this potential of getting in people who were earlier not as interested in cricket, and eventually, obviously, IPL grew from strength to strength. In the meanwhile, we take a short break talking about leagues and how they've expanded and what's the potential. There's more in store, and Jared is smirking at the thought of it. A quick break, and on the other side, we discuss more.
Come to cricket8.com to spin the wheel as we start to launch our free, fun cricket games. There are prizes to be won for the top spinners, and you can also stick around for all the live scorecards and all of our content.
Welcome back. So, Saudi has obviously now begun planning its economy beyond oil, and that we've seen for a lot of those Gulf nations. They are making major investments in sport. Now, when you make investments in sport, you also think about cricket, because although it doesn't cover a lot of countries, not a lot of countries are interested in it, but a lot of people are interested in it just because of the population in the subcontinent. And there's something exciting that's brewing that has Jared excited and interested. And Jared, is that the cue for it?
Um, yes, I am interested. I don't know. There are good things that can come out of this, right? Because
Yeah,
cricket is an absolute mess
potentially.
and could not be run any less professionally if it tried. But let's be honest, Saudi Arabia is not getting involved with this because of their best intentions. They are trying to get a PR hit. They're trying to get us to think about them
Yeah.
as a tourist destination and not as the place who murdered a guy in a consulate. Um, they want us to stop thinking about them as a petro state, which is fair enough. And they want to move on, but they're not like a cricket fanatic country, although they do have a lot of expats. And so I think actually in the next couple of years, they're quite an interesting cricket country as they develop, especially because they have a good climate for playing it at night anyway, maybe not during the daytime. We don't know much at the moment, Megha, about the specifics of it. But what we do know is that Saudi Arabia has a partnership with Cricket Australia because they bought a company
Yeah.
called DAZN. Is DAZN well known in India? Is that a
No,
company that's well
not
known?
really.
No, DAZN's really weird. It's a really big sports platform. I was just talking about it with Bayram before. It's a really big sports streaming platform, but it's not known everywhere. It's known in the places where it's needed. It's a very clever little business, and it sort of moves around in the way that it does. But they were bought by the Saudi government, or the Saudi Sports Initiative, which is the Saudi government, recently. So they have a partnership with Cricket Australia. BCCI has many partnerships with the Saudi government. They have sponsorship. Obviously, they had the auction there. They were in discussions at one stage to sell a stake in the IPL to the Saudi government. Then you've got the ICC. The ICC's major sponsor, I think their major sponsor anyway, certainly one of their biggest sponsors is Aramco, which is the
Yeah.
petrol company from Saudi Arabia, and they're sponsored by Visit Saudi Arabia as well, right?
Yeah.
So in some ways, Saudi Arabia's already in cricket. So there's a lot of people now that are very upset when this has come out, and I did a big video on my main channel, which is up at the moment, and we're pointing out how involved Saudi Arabia was in cricket before you heard this
Already.
article from Chris Barrett come out. So it's a really, really interesting one from that point of view. I don't really understand exactly what they're doing because they say they're going to have 8 tournaments a year, but it's not going to cross with any
Practically.
international cricket or the IPL. And I was like, well, how's that possible? We just discussed that the WPL cannot
Mm.
is going to clash with something every single time. So how are these new leagues not going to do it if there's going to be 8 of them?
Mm.
I think what they were originally going to do is come in through the back door and do a rebel league and just buy all the best players. And then they decided, obviously, to go in a different direction there. And what they decided to do was do partnerships with the ICC, BCCI, and now Cricket Australia. So how they changed that, Megha, and make that into a league, I don't know. For this to really work, they're talking about $500 million. That's not enough. They're going to need minimum of $1 billion. And they need the Indian players. And from what I understand, there is, I think the BCCI is, I'm saying this slightly from the outside, but the BCCI has been pretty clever so far. We're taking money and forming a partnership with the Saudis rather than going up against them, because the Saudis can outbid. There aren't many people who can outbid the BCCI, but the Saudis is certainly one of them, right? What are they talking about? A $1 trillion fund or something, right? Like, so that makes sense. It does change the future of cricket in many different ways. I think if the Saudis come in, it will be a franchise-led sport completely. Because I think even if we have Test cricket, I think the Saudis will take over Test cricket and make that franchise cricket. I think that the BCCI, the IPL. Hey,
despite the claims, would they take interest in Test cricket? They would want money as well.
Test cricket.
Apart from
Test
obviously
cricket
the
makes
PR side
money.
of things.
Why do you think we play it?
Apart from the big three, because they're also talking about making it fair for everybody involved.
But you're thinking of it in the old way. The big three, fine. Let's have a team in India. Let's have 2 teams in India. Let's have the best England player in the world playing in New Zealand. Right? You can do, that's what I'm saying. You can actually, there isn't an issue with that. There's many different things, and they may not be involved in Test cricket. It was mentioned in, I think, one of the articles as well. So there is an element at the moment of all those things, of where we go from there. But yes, it is, the future of it is confusing, because the things that you just said, I don't know how Test cricket fits in. I don't know how T20 cricket fits in. 8 tournaments throughout the year. No one's watching the IL20 really all that much at the moment. Yeah. Right? The SA20 and the Major League Cricket are doing okay. The Big Bash is struggling. 100 is struggling, right? Not for money, but for global viewership. So you're going to play, are you going to play cricket in all the, and the idea is to have a traveling league, right?
Exactly.
So I would assume you'd play
bilaterals and.
Yeah. So I would assume you're going to play 2 tournaments a year in India, right? In this Grand Slam league. You're going to play at least 1 in Saudi. I would assume 2 in Saudi. Does that mean you play 1 in England, 1 in Australia? Did you not? If you want to, you probably want 1 in America, but the time zone sucks. With the SA20, they might want something also in South Africa. So it's confusing and everything else. But the problem with cricket as it's currently run is there's no one in charge and there's no management. This does lead us to some sort of a structure if it is done correctly, right? It could also make cricket worse. It could make it a lot worse, like, you know, but I would think that the problem at the moment is we just don't have any sort of pattern or anything to our game. It feels to me that is something that could be fixed in a system like this. Because one of the big reasons I think the Players Union, which is the Australian Players Union, is so interested in this is all these Zimbabwe leagues and secondary leagues in Guyana and the Canadian global leagues and all that sort of stuff. If you hired all the best, well, we're talking about 8 teams, aren't we? So let's say you hire the best 150 to 200 players. Those other leagues really don't become they just become like satellite events in tennis at that point, right? Like someone's playing in the Guzhang International, right? In some place in China that may or may not exist, and I may have mispronounced anyway. And that therefore the major players are all in this Saudi system, which is very, very different then at that point. But it also leads us down a franchise hole, and it's also, I'm not sure 100% how it works if the Indian players don't get involved and everything else. So it's confusing, and we don't have the full details of how it's going to work yet either.
So it's going to look very different if it's a rebel league as compared to a league that has BCCI and ICC interested and involved. Because if it's a rebel league, then it's only going to be former players involved, and there are already umpteen master leagues underway in India as we speak. There's one
it won't be former players if it's a rebel league.
Or
they
players
will just
get
buy
banned, so then they become former players.
Yeah, that's what happened with Live Golf, though. They're not really former players, are they? They're current players.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to do Rebel League. I don't think it is a Rebel League.
Yeah.
All the conversations that have been leaked so far do not suggest that this is a Rebel League at all. It suggests that it's an official league, right? And I think if they were going to do a Rebel League, they would have already done it, Mega. It would have already come through. And the fact that that hasn't happened, I would say is, and that we're hearing that there are conversations going on with people in major leagues around the world at the moment, I would say is very, very different. So no, I don't think it is going to be a Rebel League. I just want to talk about Vian Singh. Saudi, no history of cricket, no legacy of cricketers will fix cricket's problems. I don't think they're not trying to fix cricket's problems, right? That's not why they're getting involved in it.
Yes.
The problem with cricket is, and I just did a speech in Boston and we were talking about cricket, and rugby has a similar problem in that in America, if you have a problem with your sport, you just change the regulations in the league because your sport is the NFL, or it's a hockey league based in North America, or it's Major League Baseball based in North America, or it's basketball based in North America. If you have a problem in cricket, we have the ICC, which is basically an events company, right? And then we have no one else. So when we have dodgy leagues going on, like quite obviously leagues that should not be existing, like the Bangladesh Premier League at the moment, which has so many issues that needs to be scrapped and started again, there is no one in charge to get involved with that, right? So that league is just going to keep getting people, major players, going over and playing in it while it can offer people money, right? And that means that we have more match fixing in cricket. That means we have more money laundering in cricket. That means we have more disorganization in cricket. What the Saudi thing is, the reason I think the players' unions are interested in this is because what you can play for a team in eight different leagues, because they're talking about 8 leagues over the course of a year, right? You can play for one team, one management group, one ownership structure, whatever that may be, all the way through, right? And so it's a very different situation than playing for 3 weeks in Bangladesh, 2 weeks in Dubai, 1 week in Abu Dhabi, 3 weeks in Guyana. That's what is causing cricket's biggest problems at the moment, right? And so it's completely different. I think you're getting very confused here. You're saying ICL was a Rebel League and maximum match fixing took place there. Again, as I said, this is not a Rebel League. If it was a Rebel League, we probably wouldn't know about it, right? A Rebel League wouldn't be involved with a company who is sponsoring the ICC, BCCI, and also has a partnership with Cricket Australia. It's not a Rebel League. I think you're very, very confused. What they are trying to do is do an official league, right, across everything else. And there's another really good one here that Mr. K says. You can create a league, but you can't create the atmosphere, the crowd, and attachment everywhere. No. That's why, again, I think people think this is a league based in Saudi Arabia. But if you read the article, it's not a league based in Saudi Arabia. It's a traveling league. I still think Mr. K makes some points here. For instance, you're trying to set up a league that is only going to be played in your country for 2 or 3 weeks of the year, right?
Yeah.
So far, we found in cricket that sort of pop-up style really struggles. And it's okay to actually understand the idea of the Grand Slam. But the Grand Slams in tennis have 150 years of history, right? So I'm from Melbourne. My mum runs a tennis club. We both know at the end of January every year, that is tennis time in Melbourne, right? So cricket is Boxing Day, is in December. And at the end of January is that. To try and create 8 different traveling leagues is going to be tough. We know that India probably won't be a problem, but it might be tough in England because the English summer is so jam-packed already as it is. How do you even fit it in if you play in England? South Africa has a little bit of time. Australia has a little bit of time if they play it in those places. If it goes to Dubai, we already know what the issue is going to be, right? Empty stadiums that no one's going to care about. So it is tough.
Saudi League in Dubai might be the geopolitics of the area.
I mean, we haven't even got to the politics yet. Saudi is a long-time supporter of Pakistan And so Saudi's going to want a league. Are they going to want Pakistan represented? How is that going to go with the BCCI and, well, more importantly, the BJP party and everything else? Like, there's already so many things here. But there's a couple of interesting questions. So it says, Saudi in cricket, really? Well, yes, that's what we're talking about because that's the article. But I've been talking about this for a couple of years. Like, I think we all knew that it was a chance of coming because they were doing all the other sports. I'm actually surprised it's taken them this long. That's why I think it's definitely not. Well, we know it's not a rebel league as it's currently set up. Sandcup says, why can't the boards ban the players on payroll from participating in dodgy leagues? Because they're on contract, the players. They're not employees. And so it is, it's restraint of trade. If you have them, you can put a contract in that says they can't play for anyone else, but then the boards would have to pay them more money, right? So let's say you are, I don't know, a New Zealand domestic player. A New Zealand domestic player is probably on anywhere between $50,000 and $120,000 a year, right? In US dollars. It's probably a lot less than that. It's probably closer to $50,000 US dollars a year. You get between $20,000 and $50,000 for turning up to the BPL, to the CPL. You get between $20,000 and $30,000 for a Zimbabwe league or a T10 league. You get $20,000 to turn up to a league in America that it isn't even a proper league, right? They can make so much more money than they can everywhere else. There isn't enough money. That's why the leagues work, right? They actually have more money than everyone else.
And the definition of dodginess as well there is not very clear because, for example, BPL, there were numerous issues that cropped up this year, including non-payments. But what about the other leagues that are very similar? We do not know the level of dodginess involved there.
So I think the Players Union, and this is why I think the Players Union want the Saudi money, right? They just want to work with someone who's going to pay them on time. Because I think the Players Union said something between 30 and 40% of player payments are late, right? And I have worked for teams as an analyst where my pay has been late, and you can't live your life that way, right? Like, you know, it's bad enough. We work in the media, Megha. We know that media payments are late. But if you're a cricketer and you've only got 2 paychecks coming that year, and one of them comes 6 to 8 months after and not only that, you spend the whole time freaking out that you're not going to get paid at all.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's so many problems in so many of these smaller leagues. And I worked in the CPL where one of my payments was, I had a problem. I worked for Major League Cricket where one of my payments was deferred by like almost a year after I did the work, right? Like, those are not small leagues. Yeah. So I've had all that sorts of problems before. This comment from Yash is really interesting. He says, if it becomes India versus that league, the rebel league point of view, we have to remember that cricket is the only sport in which nationalism plays a huge part. It's not the only sport where nationalism plays a huge part. It's the sport where nationalism is at its highest, though. You're right there. I think it's really interesting at that point, though, Yash, because if I'm a Saudi, if I'm the Saudis and I have this $1 trillion bucket, and I go to Virat Kohli and offer him $150 million a year, right? Is there any way the BCCI can match that? And what if it's 300 million, right? Like, you can just buy pretty much all the world's best cricketers. And that's what cricket was worried about for a long time before, right? Because they were worried that someone would, because cricketers are massively underpaid. For the money that cricket makes, cricketers are massively underpaid. And so it is not that hard to come in as a rebel league. That was the issue they had with the Lalit Modi-led Essel Group, which was 2014, 2015.
Subhash Chandra. Okay, sorry. Yeah. About the...
Well, he was involved as well. Like, I mean, you're talking about the ICL one.
And then Subhash Chandra was involved with this as well, yeah.
I think he was involved with both of those leagues, if I remember correctly, But yeah, so it's not that hard. I remember having the conversation with a major person from a players' union, and they were the one giving me the story at the time. And I did the maths, and I was like, that actually makes sense. Like, I even thought to myself, if I could find a billionaire, couldn't I just buy cricket? Like, it's not that hard because players are so underpaid all the way through. But it'd be really interesting, Yash, if it does become that. I don't think it's going to become... I think the Saudis, because they're talking about 500 million in this initial investment, I think they believe they can't get the Indian players now But I don't think they would be starting this if they didn't think they could get them eventually. And you know, I've had these conversations with lots of people before. The IPL owners would not be buying all these teams around the world if they didn't think eventually they could get Indian players into some of these leagues. May not be the stars, but Indian players into some of these leagues. And I would think that the Saudis, if they're starting smaller, are hoping through their partnership with the BCCI that they can do something there. But in future, I think there will be I think they would be thinking that they will eventually be able to do that. They were looking, the numbers that they were looking to pay to the IPL were staggering. I think they were looking at paying like $30 billion to buy a stake in the IPL, right? That is
And what
so
was
much
the
money.
nature of the involvement
They wanted to buy a percentage of the IPL and own the league.
of the IPL per se? Because that has not happened. That has never been
Yeah.
diluted.
I don't think so. I mean, the BCCI still own it, and the ownership and
Yeah.
how all those things work. But that's the kind of group that you're talking about here, right? So if they wanted to, have a look at what the top golfers are earning, right? So the top golfers are on at Live Golf are on about $200 million a year, right? If you went with the top 10 cricketers in the world and offered them between 50 and $150 million, you would get a lot of the best cricketers in the world. You might not get all of them. Some would be like, it's not worth me going. Some golfers didn't want to be involved with Saudi Arabia. Some golfers didn't want to live in Saudi Arabia, right? Like there's all different things. But yeah, it's changing. That whole thing is changing. And the money we are talking about here is and we're used to IPL owners, right? This is well above IPL ownership money, right? This is legitimate wealth on a level we've never seen before. If they want to throw it around, you know, I remember Michael Holding said to me once, when it comes down to it, players go where the money is, right? Like black players from the West Indies went and played in apartheid South Africa, right? And not average players, like some great players went over and did it. When the money is there, people will do things. And you are talking about, let's say you are, I'm trying to think of a really good cricketer for this. Sky, right? Let's say you're Sky. And how old would Sky be now? 32, 33?
Yeah, more than that. 33 for sure, at least.
Yeah. Saudi come along and say, you can run your own franchise, you can do whatever you want. He's $150 million a year for the next 5 years. Right? His family never has to worry about money again. That's the kind of money that can be on offer if they go down that route. I don't think they want to go down that route though, Megha, for two reasons. Yeah. One, it's a lot of money to spend that they probably don't need to spend because they already have all these relationships. And two, I do think then they got bad press when they did it for golf, right? I think they've learned from what they did with the golf and they're like, we don't want to do that again because when we did it with golf, everyone was like, oh, they're buying the game, they're ruining golf. They can do a soft takeover in this particular way.
Because that's what they want, right? Positive PR. And all of this might not contribute to it. Now, there's another question that I have for you, and that's about the football experiment. How successful do you believe it is? Because obviously we wouldn't know the tangible benefits as of now. It's Prince's 2030 vision. Maybe in 2030, around that time, we'd know how really it is working. But are these steps contributing to sports washing? It's one question. And the second part of it is, has it been successful? Is it worth spending that much money?
I think they got golf and football wrong.
Okay.
I think their best bet is to do what it looks like they're now doing with cricket, if we're being honest, which is pay the players a fortune, make sure that your name is on the lips of every single thing, that you sponsor everything, and that, I don't know, it's the IPL brought to you by Visit Saudi Arabia or whatever you want, however you want to frame it, right? Whereas I think with football, what they tried to do was make football a thing in Saudi, right? And I think that. And someone said this before, like imagine Virat Kohli playing in Saudi Arabia. Like it would feel like Ronaldo, where we'd be like, okay, and that's what's happening with the Live Golf thing. It's like, all right, and they improved some things with golf. Like I think they did not improve, but I think they did some really interesting things with golf. But no one cares because they're still going to watch the PGA most of the time or the European Tour, right? And that's the problem with football. how in 20 years' time, it might be the biggest place in the world to watch football. But for the next 15 years, it might be largely a joke. And so maybe with football, where I think I think the numbers are that there's about 8 to 10 million people in Saudi Arabia who come from an expat cricket kind of background. So let's say 5 or 6 million of them have a basic knowledge or interest in cricket. Football's going to be high because football's the biggest sport, right? So let's say the football is conservatively 4 times bigger. It's still taking a while, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I think this particular plan, and we're just talking about leaked plans at the moment, right? But this particular plan is more interesting because they are looking at taking cricket to the places that have cricket rather than bringing everyone back to Saudi Arabia. They will have some tournaments there, of course, but it is taking cricket to places where there is cricket. And then secondly, on top of this, I think the other interesting part that they're looking at the moment is this sort of roadshow element, right? Of being involved with the countries in the country's locations. So if you think about it from a Cricket Australia point of view, they don't want to be involved with the Saudis. They probably don't want to be involved with this plan at all. Oh, wait, the Saudis are coming and they're spending $50 million advertising cricket for 3 weeks in early February or late November, right? Now, does Cricket Australia go,
They're interested.
well, that's $50 million we don't have to spend, and we might not get a big cut out of it, but it will get excitement on cricket. And then the next week, our first test match starts, or we have something else going on. So
That buzz.
that to me seems like a much better idea for the South. It's cheaper, it's easier, you build relationships. Whereas I think the whole thing of bringing people over, I mean, to be fair, Pele played what in the 1970s, 1980s in American football, right? And he's every bigger name as Ronaldo, probably a bigger name than Ronaldo. And we are what 40 or 50 years on in American football, and or soccer as they call it, or as I called it, where I grew up as well. And yet, it's still not the biggest league in the world, right? Like at a certain point, you have to keep pumping in the Pelés every year, and you don't want old Pelé, you want prime Pelé. So if the Saudis could get prime Virat Kohli and prime Ronaldo, that changes things, I think, a little bit. But I still think you have the live golf problem of like everyone's like, what? I don't know. I know what the US Masters is and whatever. What's this other thing? And we've seen it with tennis tournaments. I don't know how big of a tennis tournament fan you are, but like every now and again, some country will go, we're going to have the $10 million tennis tournament and it's going to be bigger than the French Open or the Australian Open. And for about a year or two, people talk about it. And then afterwards, everyone loses interest again and they go back to watching the 2 smaller Opens again, right? Like, so that's what you were fighting, right? That's what the Saudis are fighting. And they're not fighting it because they love cricket or anything as well. Like they're doing this for sports washing. They're doing this for tourism. They're doing this to change the identity in the world of what their country is. So they don't care about cricket. So if cricket doesn't work, that can be the first one on the chopping block as well, right? Like, I don't know, Formula One isn't popular at one point. They're like, okay, we don't need that Formula One race anymore, which is why putting your faith in a country like this is always, behind.
Double-edged sword, yeah.
Yeah, double-edged. Yeah, that's the best way to put it. The money is great. The organization could change cricket forever, but in 3 years' time, they could decide that they don't want to be involved anymore.
And that's why it's going to be particularly hard for the Indian players, because even if there's an understanding between the BCCI and the Saudi government, but still, just the perception amongst people of an Indian player not being a part of the Indian team and getting involved with the league outside India.
Yeah, and also, like we were talking about before, that sort of, what if I think, and I've been saying this for a long time, that I think eventually international cricket will kind of be franchised. So what I mean by that is, I can't see how Test cricket remains in the current structure because they're not making the money off it that it's actually worth, and it doesn't quite work. It needs to be a league. It needs to be a structure, even if it's for national teams. But I think if you get something like the Saudi money coming in, they're going to want to franchise it so that they can potentially have an English player in every team, an Indian player in every team, and so that they can kind of do things from that point of view. That's even so. Even if you love Test cricket and this saves Test cricket, it's going to change it. Do you know what I mean? It's going to change the
Yeah.
fabric of the game if it comes through.
And if it also decides to take Test cricket ahead with it, which is going to be a major experiment, considering how different Test cricket is to everything else that happens in sport.
Yeah,
All
I
right
will
then.
say this:
That
we have had one experiment before with Test cricket, which people probably don't know a lot about. When we had Kerry Packer in the World Series cricket, we did actually. That kind of was. It was an Australian franchise team. It was a West Indies franchise team and a World franchise team. We have had it before, so eventually it has to. Whether it works or not, I don't know. But it's one of the people like me have been waiting for this for about a decade now, because cricket does not work, Mega, right?
were
And
you
so
the one who
eventually
pitched it
someone was
then?
going to come in. No, I was someone who had a lot of
This is on
chats with
record.
I was someone who had chats
Well,
with people behind the scenes saying, "What are you doing to stop this?"
okay.
And eventually, I think we could see that they haven't, right?
All right then. Uh, do stay updated, and to stay updated rather, do remain tuned to this area because Jared might spill more beans.
By the
Yes,
way,
in a
Oz asked
conversation.
before if the watch alongs will be back for the IPL. They will be, although I haven't booked Mega in yet, so I'm not sure if Mega is free, but I'll be talking to her probably straight after this. Rob Barron, I talked to Rob before. He's in. I think Mash is in. We won't be doing them from in the studio because Cricket 8 Studio had to be disbanded at the end of last season, so we'll be doing them online, which allows for people like Mega to do them. It'll be like last year. We won't do every single game, but we'll do some key games, and we'll try and make it work the best that we can. But yeah, stay tuned to Cricket 8. They'll be live streamed on this channel as well. And for those who haven't been here, it's kind of like, we try and talk about, it's the stories behind the cricket, the betting patterns, the analysis, and everything else on those watch-alongs. So the people who watched them loved them last year.
And yeah, so there's so much really to look forward to, including the conversation that Jared and I would have after this live concludes. I can't wait to conclude this live. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Jared. Bye bye. Leave your comments in the comment section as to what you think about the Saudi League, if it would take off, if it does, how far it can go. Thank you for joining.
Remember to support